Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kat, and I am very glad that you're with us. I am excited to announce and let everyone know that we are moving back to weekly episodes. So now every Monday, you're going to be able to hear from a new person, whether it's a personal story or a therapist or therapists or experts in the field or people who are contributing to perinatal mental health or maternal health causes in some way or another. It's been years since we've been able to do weekly episodes, and now I'm so glad that I get to be doing them weekly again. We did weekly episodes for about 3 years when I started the podcast. After that 3 years, it was a little difficult to keep it going, so we went to every other week. But now I have enough support that I am able to do these episodes weekly. So really glad that you're with us, and be sure to tune in weekly and also share these episodes so that other people can know that they are not alone. So now for today's episode, getting into this really rich and important conversation. I'm so glad that I met the therapist from Family Tree Wellness at the Postpartum Support International Conference. And I wanted them to come on to talk about this different take on perinatal mental health conditions, but also a very important one that helps expand our idea and definition of how we are affected after the transition into motherhood, but also during the whole perinatal process. Our guests today, Rebecca Gashuri and Jessica Sorcy, are both licensed marriage and family therapists, internal family systems therapists, and also perinatal mental health certified. As co-founders of Family Tree Wellness in Silicon Valley, California, Rebecca and Jessica lead their one-of-a-kind, IFS-informed group psychotherapy practice that provides counseling, education, and support for people who are in the family building phase of life. They are wildly enthusiastic about creating trainings and supporting other therapists who want to deepen their knowledge and skill with using internal family systems and working in reproductive mental health. Most importantly, they are mothers on their own healing journeys who bring their own personal experience with grief and growing, mixed with creative expression and spirituality to their work. Their goal is nothing short of healing humanity's intergenerational burdens. Today, they are going to share with us why they believe that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders need to be redefined. And they'll tell us what that means. They talk to us about using internal family systems, a type of psychotherapy, and why they believe and think and see that it does work with a perinatal mental health population. And they're also going to talk about the mother-centric approach to therapy and training that they are offering for therapists. So this episode is loaded with a really great conversation and good things for us to all be thinking about, and ideas on how we can expand our idea of perinatal mental health and how it's impacting folks. So let's dive in and meet Rebecca and Jessica. Welcome, Rebecca and Jessica. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
It's a joy.
I'm excited to get to talk to two people. It's often only one, but I do find there's just such a richness that comes with having multiple perspectives, even though you guys are going to be talking about the same thing with us. Certainly, we're all still who we are. So I'm happy to hear what you guys are into these days, specifically talking about the mother-centric approach and internal family systems. But before we get into those details, I would love to understand how you got into this specific work within the perinatal world.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much we could say here. I think Rebecca and I each have our own personal stories about, why we're interested in motherhood and in working with new moms that, taps into our histories with our own moms, with being the babies of women who struggled in their own ways, and then having children ourselves and walking through, the challenges that surprised us with motherhood. But as far as the mother-centric approach and IFS, that's been a very honestly earned or come by sort of creation. I started getting into IFS a few years ago now, maybe 5 years ago. And when I first started integrating that knowledge into my life, I knew there would be some way that it would intersect with my interest and expertise in reproductive mental health, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how. They just seem like two kind of distinct bodies of knowledge. And I used it with my clients behind closed doors, but as far as formulating some larger perspective, I just had no clue. I was scratching my head and thinking, well, maybe it'll be born naturally at some point. And over time, Rebecca also became an IFS therapist, and she and I are BFFs and BPFs, which stands for Best Partner Forever. Very cheesy, but we're super close, and we work together on the daily, and just our conversations and our work with each other, in our own difficult moments as leaders of family tree wellness and in our personal lives and mothering, and we bring it all out together. We integrate IFS when we sit in the room together and work on our own hearts and souls. And it just started happening. And the mother-centric approach is really a marriage of all the things we know about matrescence, the developmental phase of motherhood, new motherhood, patriarchy, which just has to be factored in because we really understand it to be one of the primary toxicities in our world for everyone. And then IFS, because it's such a natural and holistic and useful and healing way of working with the parts that come up in new motherhood around inner critics and shame, which we really have noticed in our work with moms that those are two gigantic leaders in the system of new moms in a patriarchal culture. So IFS is just really tuned for healing shame and understanding inner critics.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes. Rebecca, yeah, I would love to hear what this was like for you to come into this specialty.
Yeah, I come to it from a little bit of a different angle, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it's really a different angle or not, but how I conceptualize it is really from the angle of grief. I have had, loss in my life. My mom had a loss before she had me. Mm-hmm. And the way that has sort of shaped my perception of who I am and the way that I go about my day, the things that I think about. When I became a mom, I realized that there was so much disenfranchisement, that, there's so much loss in new motherhood, and we're not really allowed to talk about it. We sort of have to hide it, starting with, trying to get pregnant, and then losing babies to, miscarriage or, just how we have to hide so much about what we're actually feeling, and that's not okay to be really a human. And so all of that has sort of informed questioning what is really going on in the world with moms. I mean, if really you're looking at 20% of new moms, that's like 17 million moms who are quote unquote sick, right? And Jessica and I just started having these conversations behind closed doors, like, is that really true? Are they really sick? And I don't know. It's a bold position to take because we're kind of butting up against a lot of what our very knowledgeable feminist, people who are just like us, who are really trying to get out into the world that there's something wrong. I think we're both doing the same thing. But what we're trying to do is take some of the blame off of the mom. The mom is not the identified patient. The system really is the identified patient. you know? And so, bringing that grief out into the open has been, I think, what's really been driving me for the past, I'm going to say 18 years, because my oldest daughter is 18. And so I've been thinking, well, and probably even before that, because I started thinking about it when I was trying to get pregnant and having miscarriages and, all of that. So that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you both for sharing that. It's really helpful. I think, the podcast listeners are kind of a mix of therapists and people who are seeking understanding or going through something themselves. So again, just to bring in the reality that we're all on some level dealing with something,
Yes.
is really helpful. And it's useful to hear how, even though we've only heard just a couple of minutes, but how individual life experience within the system that you're describing is impacted. And it's, while, some themes are pretty similar, it's still, everybody comes to whatever it is they're dealing with on their own path.
That's right.
So there's a couple of things just for people who might not understand terms, if I could have you guys define just a couple of things. One is what is internal family systems, if you can put it briefly, if possible.
Sure. Yeah, it's a model, a therapeutic model that's evidence-based. Richard Schwartz is the creator of it. And essentially it taps into the belief that we are multitudes, that we are not one unitary personality, but rather lots of different parts of ourselves. And a really simple way of understanding it is saying, like, I had one part that was so ecstatic this morning to come on this podcast and excited to meet you, Kat, and share time with Rebecca. And I had at least one other part that was like terrified. And, one that was kind of waking me up way too early going, wait, are you going to be able to answer those questions? And you're not sleeping very well. Are you going to be bright enough? So like anxious parts or critics that, that are aware of another part of me that holds some shame from earlier in life when I was small and had experiences of feeling like I wasn't enough, or I was unworthy, or there was something wrong with me. And so IFS looks at those distinct parts as coexisting, as being part of a system inside. And then there, it's developed a way of, or it is a developed way of approaching those parts in a really non-judgmental, respectful, curious, compassionate manner, so that you can inquire and understand and build relationships with even the nasty parts, so to speak, the ones that are unwanted, that create the burst of adrenaline or the feeling of shame, and get to know them and understand that at the core, they're all well-intentioned, that they all developed adaptively to try to help you in terms of protective parts. The ones that hold the shame are more, they're called exiles, and they're not here to do something. They're more like stuck in time with burdens and false beliefs from childhood generally. So, the work in a broad sense, this is not as brief as perhaps you hoped, but the work is to be able to get into some of that exiled pain and unburden it and release it.
The other thing I think I would add about that is that the other thing that IFS really holds as a fundamental belief is that we're all born good, right? We're all born with a self with a capital S that is whole and pure. And, we'll talk about the 8 C's, which are compassion, curiosity, creativity, calm. Help me out here, Jess.
Clarity,
connectedness,
creativity.
Yeah, we have them all on our wall in our office, but those are sort of the embodiment of self, and it really can't be damaged. And the parts that come up to are there to protect that self, right? So that's their good intention. They're there to protect you in some way. And by building an internal relationship from the parts to the self, that's really where the healing is, because we can't really rely on somebody outside of us to take care of that for us. We heal in relationship as well, because we butt up against our partner's parts as well. And so they sort of, trigger us, and Dick Schwartz calls that our tormentors, right? So they're actually mentoring us. But that is, to me, really powerful, that actually is there no matter what happened to you, because you can't change the past, but you can change your relationship to it, right? I know that sounds a little cliche. We've heard it before, but it's true.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. Okay, thank you. That's incredibly helpful. So, Rebecca, there was another term that you used, identified patient. If you could explain what that means to the listeners.
Yeah, that's a term that therapists have sort of been taught to use, that when somebody comes into the office, they're the identified patient, or in a family system, there's one person who is the problem. And in terms of reproductive mental health, what we're talking about is the mom being the problem in a lot of contexts. And sometimes when we diagnose somebody with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, they become the one that's blamed for the stuff that's going on, right? But when really more, and again, this is kind of a bold position to take, right? But that she really is suffering most likely because she doesn't have support, she doesn't have resources, she has had a really tough childhood. I mean, the list goes on, right?
Maybe some birth trauma, difficulty breastfeeding, maybe a colicky baby, maybe a partner who works 70 hours a week.
Exactly. And maybe a pregnancy that was unwanted, right? And, still had to go through with it for some reason. And the sperm donor, I'll just call them, is not in the picture, right? Or doesn't want to be. And so there's just such a myriad ways that people become the identified patient.
Right. So that's the person that is, coming to us or in our office, or going to their doctor and saying, that they don't feel right, don't feel themselves. They need help and support. But I think what you're also saying is that if all the systems were working in a better way, I'll just say, that were more supportive, then either she wouldn't have this challenge, or maybe even it would be a lot less.
Yeah, and maybe she would still have challenges, because obviously there are also a lot of hormonal things that happen postpartum and just during matrescence. But she wouldn't necessarily have to suffer. And I just sort of take the fundamental belief that we don't have to suffer through life. Sure, we can do things that are hard, but we don't actually have to suffer through them. Yeah. Jessica has something to say.
I wanted to add, I think that what would be more accurate is to see her as more of a hero. That yes, she's got some difficult feelings coming up, probably some physical discomfort. Emotions are, huge. She's adjusting to a new role. She's revisiting experiences from her own early life, because she's so wide open. We talk about there being a perinatal portal where your own attachment templates are referenced when you have a baby. So whatever happened to you in your attachment history is going to be coming up when you have a baby. So the fact that she was able to host and grow and birth, and then maybe, feed a new life and form a relationship with that baby, and figure out how to navigate her own, material from her perinatal portal, deal with all of the intense hormonal shifts. That's actually heroism. And I wish, and I'm striving and hoping, and Rebecca is too, for a culture that sees that as a massive feat to almost revere rather than diagnose. When it looks difficult because it is difficult. And the mom comes in and says, I'm struggling, or I'm having, anxiety, I'm having some intrusive thoughts, or I'm feeling really down or alone, or I'm having shame or sense of perfectionism and I'm not hitting those marks, that we wouldn't say, okay, here's your diagnosis, here's your medication. We're all hoping you get better so that you don't hang things up for your partner any further, or you can get back to work or whatever it is. I mean, I understand that we need that sometimes, and Rebecca gets it too. Medication is sometimes critical. Moms need to function. Families need to be able to, get the food on the table and get the kids off to school and get to work. But the identified patient piece is really pinning the onus on mom. In some way, she's failed. It's a faulty system in her. She's depressed. She's got a diagnosis now. And we just don't think that bears truth in the bulk of the moms we see. And in our own experience, I'll say for myself, I know that I easily could have been given a diagnosis. I was offered medication, and those were kind people that, looked at me through those eyes and approached me with those ideas postpartum. But I knew I wasn't sick. I knew there wasn't something fundamentally wrong with me. I was having a hard time because it was a really difficult job and I didn't have a supportive setup. And if those things had been attended to differently, I wouldn't have been looked at as the sick one. And so something about that really stuck with me, even though I'm 13 years postpartum now. I felt insulted by that. I felt like something vital got missed. And so that's a big piece of my energy around wanting to redefine PMADS.
Yeah, I think I would also add, it feels like there's a little bit of gaslighting going on, right? That there are moms and women who really do believe that they're broken or sick, but it's really not coming from inside of them, right? They're they're like big sponges, and they're marinating in this narrative that they are broken or sick. Mm-hmm. And so they internalize it, and then they begin to believe it. And I mean, I've got several clients who feel that way. And so our work is really around learning to trust themselves and finding their inner wisdom by doing this parts work, right? And working with the part that is so critical and is blaming and shaming them for, really just doing what they were doing, birthing a baby, or, having a really hard time getting pregnant. Those things are really challenging. And I just think we have to acknowledge them differently, but not place the blame on moms.
Yeah, for sure. So, I thank you for digging into that a bit. So in terms of redefining perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, I don't know if the right question is, well, what would you call it instead? Or are there specific things that additional specific things that you'd like to call out in the redefinition of it, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, we agree that, it's important to have PMADs diagnosable, because we have insurance companies. Sometimes you need a diagnosis to get a longer leave from work. Sometimes having a diagnosis is helpful even within a family, to have a partner understand that there's something, quote unquote, legitimate going on with this new mom. A lot of that, though, is cast under the shadow of patriarchy from our perspective, that because motherhood isn't, matrescence in particular, isn't respected and understood in our culture as the most formative moment in humanity, where moms are really creating the contributors for our society going forward. And so this period of time is, as vulnerable and as critically important as one can be. So that time period needs to be protected, but that isn't understood. So our redefinition is kind of a play on PMADS. It's patriarchy during matrescence and the disease of shame. That's kind of how we see what most of our clients show up with, not something that you'd want to like look up in the DSM and find exactly what is wrong with them, but more like, oh, you too. You're also living in the same culture, and you're also going through matrescence. And, and in the background, one of the slides we use in our mother-centric training shows some stats that I think it's 1 in 4 women is the victim of sexual assault. 1 in 6 has been raped. When you think about the prevalence of violence against women and the collective burdens we carry from centuries of oppression and abuse, that's coming into the picture too. That's part of what each woman shows up with when she gets pregnant, gives birth, and then begins attaching to a new baby. It's a long legacy of patriarchy that we're contending with alongside the sort of structural systemic components of patriarchy.
Yeah, and Rebecca, if you could speak to that shame piece as well.
Yeah, I think the shame is really what causes the suffering in new moms in particular, those inner critics that just come in and berate her for not doing things right. I'm making air quotes here. And being shoulding themselves, right? Not being able to be the capable, again, air quotes, person that they were before, and that being in this society that really is built on individualism and capitalism and materialism and racism, right? That they didn't have a chance. Yeah.
So how does, I guess in terms of, Rebecca, when I'm hearing you, I'm thinking too of like in what you guys were talking about earlier in terms of internal family systems and parts. And this like I guess if you can go into a little bit of how internal family systems works is specifically right now in terms of shame, and then we can get into a little bit more of the perinatal other stuff.
Well, internal family systems, again, really believes that all parts are welcome. And so there's never a part that is relegated in some way. We're always kind of moving closer, moving towards the parts, even the ones that feel really challenging. And shame is one of those exiles, like Jessica said. And, so it's important to, as the therapist also, for the therapists who are listening out there, to move closer to their own shame as well, do their own inner work so that they can then be open to being okay with moving towards that with their clients. Jessica, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that we look a lot with the mother-centric approach at the shame system, or the shame sort of network inside of each of us, which consists of, in simple terms, a part that does the shaming. So like an inner critic that wags its finger and says, not good enough, try harder, don't screw that up. And then on the receiving end, there's a shamed part that's absorbing that message, that's resonating with it, that has been holding shame to begin with. So the two of them kind of work together and create, the intention is to keep you from being shamed when an inner critic comes up. So new moms who are perfectionistic, which as most therapists who work in this field know, that is so common, really striving to hit every freaking mark and berating themselves, or their inner critics are going hog wild inside, noticing where they don't measure up, feeling like someone else would be a better mom to this baby, that the baby would be better off without them. Those are all these sort of inner critic messages that are just really dousing fuel into old shame pockets. So we want to help the shame. And how does IFS address and help shame? It's got to get past the protectors first. So you have to befriend protectors. And that's its own phase of really validating and understanding the inner critics and the ways in which our systems are designed to guard against and defend that tender, vulnerable shame that's inside. Once we can get past protectors, which takes some time and trust, we get into that inner pocket of shame. And those are just these really tender, vulnerable places inside that need to be compassionately held and loved. And most of all, if we can make it there, unburdened. Unburdening is it's a specific kind of process in IFS where you can really ask apart, what false beliefs did you take on, and where are they in your body? And if you could let them go right now, would you like to? And how would you like to release those beliefs? And it's a really often physical, emotional sort of process of, for example, finding, residue in your bones of feeling like you were never wanted. And then, the part will come up with its own vision, its own plan for how to let that go. I want to release that into the air and have the clouds, sweep it away off into the ethers where it becomes the dust of all creation. Okay, let that happen. And you really support your client in having that unburdening. It sounds really woo-woo, but as someone who did a bunch of time as a therapist without IFS and then has now done, 5 years or so as a therapist with IFS, it's unbelievably powerful to be able to get to the root and clear out those shame pockets. And people are not the same afterward. They walk with so much more space in their hearts, so much more capacity to be compassionate with themselves and their children and their partners. So that's what we're looking for is really healing on that level. Having that in mind. And if a diagnosis and medication is what's needed to help a mom make it through the month, the week, this particular chapter, thank God we have that. We're not in any way saying it's one or the other, but I think what's important to me and Rebecca and why we created this mother-centric approach is because we want to have that bigger picture that's not the stopping place, handing a mom a pill and saying, you'll get over this depression, take this. And everybody kind of wiping their brow and saying, well, thank God, she'll be better soon. It's looking at the whole system of, what's holding her in this framework that doesn't work fundamentally, that patriarchal kind of every man for himself perspective. And then understanding matrescence. What do new moms actually need? What are they experiencing? And then using that IFS approach to work with whatever's dredged up for her in this process of her perinatal portal being wide open and all of her early attachment material rushing in. So that's it in a nutshell. It's not much of a nutshell.
There's a lot in that
Yes.
nutshell. Yeah, it's really, I mean, I'm thinking for people who are like therapists will be able to follow along pretty well. And for people who are maybe new to therapy or hearing, this a particular approach, I'm glad you mentioned kind of, it sounds woo-woo, but it's not. Because I think in some way I'm seeing a lot of therapists move towards, even if it's not doing internal family systems specifically, I hear more people talking about parts. And parts is parts of the the self, as you said. But I do think it is really powerful to get into that perspective and give those hurt parts of voice, if they're ready to give their voice. It's really powerful.
That's
Yeah. I just throw one other thought in. I know I'm being verbose, but talk therapy and understanding in a logical way, okay, you're having these depressed feelings because X, Y, and Z happened and your hormones are like this. All of that knowledge really is in your frontal cortex, and it's your thinky stuff that's not connected particularly at all to your trauma or your deep emotionality or your early life experience that happened when you were pre-verbal, which is all down here. I'm gesturing toward like the lower part of the brain. So when we're working with that dense emotional trauma material, we can't really talk about it and hope that the talking alone is going to heal things. It's helpful to understand structurally what's going on with a person. But if you want to heal, you have to go woo-woo a little bit, because it's going to be less verbal. It's not going to make sense. It's felt in the body. It's emotional. So you got to go where the stuff is, and it is in that woo-woo territory.
Yeah, I want to add to that just that, you know, we are developed sort of this 2-track method that we're calling it, right? That is addressing sort of the symptoms and the shame. So all those sort of practical things that people come into therapy with, like, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping when my baby is sleeping, I'm having intrusive thoughts, like all that kind of stuff. We want to address those things in a practical way, but at the same time, always keeping in mind all the deeper stuff that's sitting in the person's cells, you know, and there are other modalities, right, of therapy that do things that get into that midbrain, like brain spotting. I love EMDR does that, somatic experiencing, right? All those modalities that really address the trauma from a cellular level, but we have to be doing both. And I think internal family systems, the magic is that it actually is a great marriage of that naturally, because we can talk to protectors and use some of that frontal cortex stuff. And at the same time, you know, getting layer by layer a little bit deeper. And eventually we're into that subcortical material. And that's really where the healing is, whether it's a little T trauma, you know, or a big T, big thing that happened to you. So that's really why I love IFS. And I also think IFS blends really well with other modalities like brain spotting. And sometimes you're going to do CBT with a part in a way, right?
That's
you're
what it
address
is, right?
Their beliefs,
It's
right?
CBT for parts.
So in terms of then what is a mother-centric, if you can, I guess, define that. What is mother-centric?
Yeah.
You've been talking about the approach in what you're saying, but yeah, if somebody is, I guess, specifically a therapist listening and they're interested in learning more about this, what's the headline?
Yeah, the high level is a mother-centric therapist is really well informed about matrescence and patriarchy and how patriarchy is influencing matrescence. The therapist also has a real self-awareness of the client's inner system. They're curious, I should say, about the client's inner system in a really deep way, but they're also really curious about their own system. So we're really advocating for therapists to do their own inner work. That's, yes. I think, honestly, I think number one, really, highlight, for any bold, modality. Yeah, exactly. Yes. You can only take a client as far as you've gone yourself, right? Yes. It doesn't mean that you have to experience everything that they've experienced, but we do have to be curious about what's going on inside of us. Yep. And then the third thing is what I talked about before with the addressing symptoms and shame at the same time, you know, using that 2-track kind of line of thinking, that we're always addressing what it is the client is coming in with right now, because that's why they showed up at your doorstep. And then also just keeping in mind that there's always something deeper going on that needs some real healing.
And I'll just toss in quickly that our culture is very baby-centric. So we created this mother-centric approach to really contrast against that. It's not so much, at least when people come sit on our couch, we're going to be focusing on mom, not on baby, versus moms who get dumped after that 1 6-week postpartum visit and kind of never seen again. and baby goes, constantly to the pediatrician, and everything gets really channeled into baby's health and development. We're interested in mom's health and development. We care about the baby too, but we know baby's kind of being taken care of. So it's mom.
Right. Well, and the baby is, if the mom is feeling good and well and healthy, she's going to be a better mom to her baby. And the baby is the next generation. Right. So it only makes sense that we really focus on mom's well-being.
Yeah, for sure. So you had also mentioned before, yeah, that you are doing some training, or you're developing some stuff that therapists can get involved with. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, we just actually on Friday last week did our first mother-centric approach training. We had about 20 some odd people, mostly therapists, a doula and a lactation consultant and a midwife. We're all there too, which was really fun. And we're doing another one of those in December. And then we also are doing a specific training, which we presented at the PSI conference actually, called perinatal perfectionism, using IFS to heal inner critics. So it's a very sort of specific, shorter training just about inner critics. And then we're also writing a book about this mother-centric approach. And you're the first person we're telling that to out loud. So I'm having a part that's coming up that's like, oh my gosh, I just put it out into the world. Now we actually have to do it. But the truth is, it's really written already, with all the work we've been doing on our trainings. We just have to organize it in a way that a publisher would want it.
No,
maybe
great.
I'll add that. So Rebecca and I run Family Tree Wellness in Campbell, California. We have currently 12 therapists working with us, and we are a training site as well as being a facility for clients. So we've got 6 associates right now who we're training, and we train all of our therapists in the mother-centric approach, so that everyone who works here is specializing in reproductive mental health and using IFS to work with inner critics and shame and knowing about patriarchy and matrescence. And that's our bag.
Yes, that's very fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know from what you said before that the clients that you've worked with through this with this approach, it sounds like have had really deep and lasting positive change.
I think so. And I would also say that I'm one of those people, not a client of Family Tree Wellness, obviously, but yeah, I can attest to it from my own personal inner work that my life has been drastically changed because of it. So I'm a believer.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. I love therapy and healing. It's like the coolest thing ever.
Yay.
Let's just have a therapy love fest.
I know. I just wish everyone would go to therapy and feel better.
We're getting there. It's getting better, right? I think, unfortunately, the pandemic, silver lining, did help with increasing, who comes for therapy, who sees the problems of that need and deserve support.
Right. I want to thank you also, Kat, because I think your podcast I've been listening to for a long time now. And I think what you're doing by having these conversations is really elevating the conversation and putting it out into the world in a way that is compassionate and caring. And I just really appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
Ditto. And you're a great interviewer. I really appreciate your questions and how you set things
very
up.
Kind. Thank you so much.
Agreed.
Well, I thank you so much for being with us. And I really hope that, the therapists who want to learn more can find you, and we'll let them know how to do that. So thank you for your time.
What a gift.
Thank you. Thanks, Kat.